Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC Las Vegas, Petr Yan versus Merab Dvalishvili just ended, and this is going to be my UFC Las Vegas post-fight where I discuss all the notable fights on the main card. But in this video, I'm mainly going to be discussing the main event, Petr Yan versus Merab Dvalishvili. And first off, let me just say, I couldn't have been more terribly wrong. I've only gotten one main event prediction wrong for the entirety of 2023, but now I've gotten two wrong, and I could not have been more wrong about this fight. I knew what Merab Dvalishvili's strategy would be going into this fight. I did not think he would be effective. He wins a 50-45 decision, a unanimous 50-45. We can debate about the scorecards a little bit, but what is not up for debate is Merab Dvalishvili clearly won this fight. And this was a shocking performance by Petr Yan, in my opinion. And I expected Yan to be able to go out there, have the defensive grappling, have the technical striking, should be super defensively responsible, have the clinch work, and I thought he'd be able to go out there and it wouldn't be super competitive with Merab. I thought if Merab won this fight, he would maybe, win a decision, but it'd be kind of a close fight where the rounds were competitive. But I had no idea that Merab would win in the capacity that he won, and he showed some of the strengths we already knew he had, but for me personally, I was underrating them more than I should have. Even though I was high on those particular strengths and I knew that those were his strengths, I didn't value him as much as I should have going into this fight. So as far as the round by round, every round was pretty much the same. I do think you could give Yan the first round. I even think the second round was debatable. But ultimately, I don't disagree with a 50-45 scorecard. If I gave any rounds to Yan, it'd probably be round one. You had round one where, Merab was shooting in on takedowns. Yan was defending. I think at the end of the round, Yan got a takedown. I don't know if the UFC counted it or not, but got like a trip. And then Merab ended up on top, but it was like the last 10 seconds of the round. The first round was kind of uneventful. Merab was pressing forward, throwing some leg kicks. Yan was throwing some leg kicks, landed a couple jabs. Not a super eventful first round, but I thought you could have gave that to Yan. Second round is where Merab started to pull away, but I think the second round was still very close. I think you could have gave it to Yan as well. But after that, I think it was purely Merab Dvalishvili, 3, 4, and 5. And I really don't think anybody was debating the scorecards at all. And I have absolutely no problem with a 50-45 decision for Merab Dvalishvili. Because in that second round, he started chopping the legs of Yan, landed a couple heavy low kicks, and it really changed the trajectory of the fight, in my opinion, because Yan had to switch stances, and then it just seemed like after that he was never the same, even though Merab didn't continue to attack that. And you can really summarize this fight every round. It was basically the same for the most part. But in some of the rounds, especially the later rounds, where both guys were getting a little bit more tired, you saw Merab be a little bit more effective. Basically, this fight was Merab putting his pace on Petr Yan. We know Yan has a great gas tank. We know Yan has good defensive wrestling. We know Yan has very technical striking. We knew going into this fight that Merab Dvalishvili had great stamina, had great durability and grit, and also had great wrestling ability. And in this fight, Merab showed me that his pace is unbelievable. I really believe people are going to start coming out of the woodworks and claiming Merab's on PEDs, Merab's using EPO, because his cardio looked unbelievable tonight. He shot so many takedowns. And Yan, to his credit, and going into this fight, this is what I thought would happen, Yan defended a lot of them. And even the ones Merab got, he wasn't really ever able to sustain control over Petr Yan. But ultimately, when you're shooting a takedown every 5 seconds, how can you ever get off any offensive striking? And that's basically what happened for Yan in this fight. He was playing a guessing game. He could not let his hands go because Merab was just constantly shooting in on a single leg. And then if he wasn't doing that, he was clinching up with him. And Yan just could never let his hands go. In this fight, Yan threw very little shots because he was constantly waiting for the takedown attempt for Merab. And he stuffed a lot of them. I forgot what the exact stats were, but Merab shot for like 50-some takedowns or 40-some takedowns. I think he got like 10 or 11 of them. He was never able to really sustain control over Yan, which I thought would be the case. But ultimately, when you have that level of pace where you just don't get tired, you can constantly shoot in on takedowns. You get some, you don't get some. It doesn't matter because now you have Jan. All he's worried about is the threat of the takedown. He can't let his hands go. Now, he landed some good body kicks. He landed a couple good leg kicks. He landed a couple good shots with his hands, a couple jabs. But ultimately, the entire fight was Merab shooting on single legs and controlling him a little bit here and there. And just the positional control. I think by the end of the fight, he had about 7 minutes of control, which isn't completely a dominant grappling performance. But, you know, it was effective. And I think a lot of people coming out of this fight are going to try to diminish Merab Dvalishvili's win here. That will not be me. Because I believe Petr Yan is still one of the best in the bantamweight division. And Merab went out there and put an unbelievable pace on him to the point where Jan was just standing there and wasn't able to, just wasn't able to answer. Jan had a couple, I think he had 2 takedowns. I think he had a takedown in the first round and a takedown in the second round. I don't know if the UFC counted him or not. There was a couple moments where Merab was getting sloppy on the feet and then ended up on his back, but then scrambled back to his feet. Jan would end up on top. But for the most part, we just have Merab's unbelievable pace versus, Jan's ability to be able to strike. He was just worried about the takedown and the clinch consistently. Jan still was able to compete in the clinch. He was even reversing position and put Merab against the fence. So I don't feel like a lot of people were acting like it was a complete blowout. And I understand I said I don't disagree with a 50-45 scorecard. But I feel like that's kind of misinterpreting it a little bit. This wasn't a complete, absolute blowout. Like, we're not looking at like a Jamal Hill, Glover Teixeira type fight or a Glover Teixeira, Anthony Smith fight. I don't remember. Actually, I don't even remember. But towards the end of that fight, it was a dominant finish. You don't have that here. I don't think Jan took an ungodly amount of damage. I think the leg kicks of Merab are very underrated. I'll be looking at those in the future to predict future fights because he was slamming those calf kicks on Jan. And Jan checked one of them, and that's what hurt his leg. And I don't know, Merab stopped really throwing them after the second round, so I'm wondering if it affected both guys, and that's why Merab stopped. But the pace, the cardio, the pressure, the grit, the determination, Merab's heart is unquestionable. And that's how he won this fight. And he beat one of the best 135-pounders in the world. You could make an argument that this was Petr Yan's title defense. And I know some people are going to call me crazy. I think that Jan defeated Aljamain Sterling in the second fight to get his belt back. He was going to win the first fight against Aljamain Sterling up until the illegal knee. And he definitely beat Sean O'Malley 30-27. So you could make the argument that Jan was still the champion. Merab went out there and took his uncrowned championship belt. That's what Merab did tonight. And also, one thing I didn't take into account was the small cage. This cage look, I swear, I need somebody to find the answer to this. Was this cage smaller than the Apex cage? It looked incredibly small tonight, and I think that was extremely beneficial to Merab. But also, sometimes I think Petr Yan's confidence plays to his detriment in fights because he was so willing to be in there and grapple and look to shoot for takedowns of his own and clinch with Merab. And I feel like the footwork should have been more of a factor. Pumping the jab, chopping the legs and just circling. Just make Merab chase after him. But ultimately, he decided to fight the way he fought. Merab, because of the takedown, he landed some shots on the feet. He didn't land a lot on the feet. I know some people are going to point to stats and say this and that. Merab didn't land a whole lot on the feet. There was a massive swelling over Petr Yan's right eye. I'm not even sure what caused that. Somebody in the chat suggested it was a headbutt. I didn't see it. Merab did land a couple good shots on the feet with his hands. But that's pretty much the fight. It was Merab shooting in on takedowns. Jan kind of defending him. There'll be a scramble, maybe a little bit of positional control for Merab, and then just reset and back to square one. And, I really feel like my assessment of both guys' skills wasn't way off. I just underestimated in comparison to each other. I thought Jan would be able to stuff the takedowns, which he had great success stuffing takedowns in this fight. And I thought he was the better striker. But the problem was, I knew Merab was determined. And I knew he has unbelievable heart. I knew he's really durable, really tough. But I just didn't think, once he kept continuing to be shut down with the takedown offense, I didn't think he'd be so unrelenting for 5 rounds. We've never seen Merab go 5 rounds. So I just underestimated. I knew what Merab's skills were, but I underestimated them drastically. I will not make that mistake again. And I think anyone trying to say Petr Yan's washed up and this win doesn't mean anything for Merab, I think you're crazy, because this is a massive win for Merab. This was it's not the most aesthetically pleasing performance, but at the end of the day, and people are going to blame Merab for this. They're going to say all Merab does is clinch. All Merab does is shoot for takedowns. At the end of the day, it's not only on Merab, it's on Petr Yan as well, because it's Petr Yan's job to be able to defend those. And I know he did defend some of them, but at the end of the day, if you're getting controlled in the clinch, if you're getting taken down, if you're not able to get off on your feet because you're worried about the takedown, that's on Petr Yan as well. And when you're fighting an elite level striker like Yan, what is Merab supposed to do? Stand in front of him and just strike with him the whole fight? No. So I think this is a solid win for Merab. I think he went out there and beat a very good Petr Yan, an elite of the elite Petr Yan. And arguably Merab could be champion right now. And that's where it leads me to a little bit of my disappointment, because we have Aljamain Sterling as the champion right now, who is a teammate of Merab Dvalishvili. And he's saying, I'm not fighting Aljamain, wait until he goes up, this and that. That's disappointing, because Merab in this fight, in my opinion, has earned himself a title shot. I think he was ranked number 3 going into this fight. With a win over Petr Yan, who I believe was ranked number 2, he has to get a title shot here. And I know we have Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo coming up at UFC 288. And maybe Henry Cejudo defeats Aljamain Sterling. I believe he will. Spoiler alert. I think Cejudo will win that. And then Merab can fight for the belt. But in a world where Aljamain Sterling stays champion, he may very well beat Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo sat out for 3 years. I think it's weird to have Merab just kind of lingering out there, kind of being like a bodyguard for the bantamweight title. I'm not a big fan of that at all. He's just going to be lingering out, killing off contenders. And I don't think the UFC is going to like that very much either. So it's going to be interesting. Maybe, just maybe, if Aljamain Sterling defeats Henry Cejudo, he goes up to 145 and lets Merab have a shot at the title. I could see that happening. But I'll tell you one thing. It is a stark contrast for Merab's performance against Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley's performance against Petr Yan. Because even though O'Malley got the official judges' scorecards, he won the fight. He lost that fight. That was a brutal robbery. That was one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. Merab went out there and clearly defeated Petr Yan. Whether you want to say it was 50-45, 49-46, whatever you want to call it, he clearly defeated Petr Yan. And O'Malley went out there and lost, even if you want to give him the judges' scorecards. So I think Merab should definitely leapfrog O'Malley. I think Merab, with this win, should leapfrog the winner of Chito Vera versus Corey Sandhagen, which is going down in a couple weeks. But, I'll tell you one thing. I think Sean O'Malley's ranked number 1 right now. I think Sean O'Malley is phoning up Colby Covington right now and asking if he can come stay with him at his house for witness protection. He is joining the safe house with Colby Covington, because I don't know anyone in the division that Merab doesn't beat outside of maybe Aljamain Sterling or Henry Cejudo. They're the only 2 that I think can defeat Merab Dvalishvili, because the stamina is unreal. The grappling's unreal. We just saw what he did to Petr Yan. What do you think he would do to Sean O'Malley? He would drop Sean O'Malley on his head with that relentlessness. And I get the striking isn't particularly refined or technical. And I get the style isn't particularly aesthetically pleasing. And I think a lot of people are going to complain how ugly it is. And, Merab, all he does is this and all he does is that. If he's able to do it and he's able to win, it doesn't matter. It is effective in the fight game. He is winning fights this way. And if that is his best path to victory, what more can you expect from him? And I think it's crazy because Merab is just going to continue to improve. And the gas tank is unbelievable. There's nobody with a gas tank at 135 that can compare to Merab's. I would probably favor Merab over Aljamain Sterling at this point. Unfortunately, we will never see that fight. I'll have to see how Henry Cejudo looks against Aljamain Sterling before I make that determination. Because the Henry Cejudo that retired, I would probably pick Cejudo. But it's going to be very interesting if Cejudo wins the belt, because do they give Aljamain Sterling a rematch? Or if all of a sudden, is Merab going to be in title contention? But then you have Sean O'Malley as number 1 contender, which I think it will be a travesty. And I understand why the UFC would do it, don't get me wrong. I think it would be a travesty if Sean O'Malley gets a title shot over Merab. Look at both of their performances against Petr Yan. But this was craziness, because now Petr Yan has now lost, 4 out of his last 5 Oh my goodness, because he has 2 losses to Aljo, a loss to Sean O'Malley on paper, and a loss to Merab. He's lost 4 out of his last 5. That is just mind-blowing. This was must-win for Jan. I wonder where he goes from here. I wouldn't mind seeing Jan versus the loser of Sandhagen or Cheeto versus Cheeto. I think that kind of makes sense. But, I mean, Merab just took out Petr Yan. I never thought it would happen. I thought that Jan's defensive abilities would be good enough to win him this fight. And he kept it on the feet. Don't get me wrong. He wasn't dominated in the grappling by any means. But because of the constant shots, because Merab's gas tank was better, and he started to pull away in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, where he was just able to get a little bit more control every time he shot in on a takedown, Jan was just ineffective. He threw very little shots on the feet. But that's just the way the game goes. You know, Merab is able to technically outstrike Petr Yan because of the threat of the takedown. So, great win for Merab. Not the best looking win, but it doesn't matter because, you know, people always say, oh, if it's crazy and it works, it's not crazy. You know, it's effective. Merab is effective. The heart, the determination, the grit, the stamina, you have to compliment Merab on that. And I think he could be a future champion. I think he probably will be a future champion. And I think, you know, I favor Merab over Chito Vera. I favor Merab over Corey Sandhagen. I favor Merab over Sean O'Malley. I'd be very confident picking Merab in those fights. So, great performance against a former champion like Petr Yan, who was not washed up, because I know a lot of people are going to play that narrative. Moving down to the co-main event, Alexander Volkov versus Alexandr Romanov. Alexandr Romanov looked like he should have signed up to be a before picture for one of those, you know, weight loss programs coming into this fight. He looked like he didn't train for this fight, and it showed in the fight. I picked Volkov by TKO. I thought he would get it done in the later rounds. Romanov looked horrible. He came out, shot in on a takedown. Volkov grabbed the fence, but I don't think it really affected it. And then, you know, eventually shoots in on another takedown. Volkov was landing some good shots right before that. Teep kick to the body. Ends up sprawling out, just beating him up on the ground. Romanov just showed up for a check, in my opinion. Gets TKO'd in the 1st round. And it's crazy. What a stark contrast from like a year ago, where people were saying Romanov's a future heavyweight contender. And now, lost 2 in a row. Volkov absolutely dominated him, destroyed him. He quit on the ground. He came in out of shape. And, you know, I don't know what more to say. Volkov is good when he's not fighting the best of the best. And he's going to continually gatekeep that top 5 of the heavyweight division. And, you know, Romanov, I think a lot of people got too hyped on him too early. The takedowns were sloppy. The takedowns looked labored. It didn't look like he was in shape. It looked like he was already tired, you know, 2 minutes into the 1st round when he got finished. He already looked tired on the ground, and he just didn't move. He was getting beat up, and he just didn't move. So Volkov, you know, sprawled out the takedown and then beat him up, ground and pound finish. Solid win for Volkov. Moving down to the featured fight on the main card. This was supposed to be a main event from a couple weeks ago. Nikita Krylov versus Ryan Spann. I would have gotten this main event correct as well. Nikita Krylov wins in the 1st round via triangle choke. This was a crazy 1st round. Ryan Spann came out heavy, looking to land big power shots. May have even rocked Nikita Krylov. They didn't show great, you know, replays. Then they ended up in the clinch. Ryan Spann got a takedown, ended up in full mount. Krylov scrambles out. There's a bunch of random scrambles where both guys are looking for submissions. At one point, Ryan Spann was looking to lock up a Darce choke. And then eventually Nikita Krylov ended up on his back. Ryan Spann stood up, shook him off over the top, and then fell into his guard. And Nikita Krylov locks up a triangle choke and submits Ryan Spann at 3 minutes and 38 seconds into the 1st round. Great performance by Nikita Krylov. What a career resurgence for Nikita Krylov. And he is showing that he belongs within the top 5 of the light heavyweight division. And Krylov could be fighting for a belt in the next year. You know, he's been around for a while. He's traded wins and losses. He's really started to come into his own over the last year, 2 years, year and a half. The striking has looked good. He has great durability, good stamina. The jiu-jitsu is looking good. Ryan Spann has unbelievable knockout power. And Ryan Spann's also a very big light heavyweight. Ended up in full mount. Nikita Krylov constantly scrambling, constantly moving, avoiding submission attempts from Ryan Spann like that Darce choke. Even a Kimura at one point, I think he used to sweep him. and eventually finds that triangle choke. He looked like Paul Craig, honestly. The way, as quickly as he locked up that triangle choke, he basically looked like a version of Paul Craig. So great performance by Nikita Krylov. Stakes his name kind of as a top 5 light heavyweight, and very promising future for Nikita Krylov because I think he keeps improving. That's one thing I keep looking for in contenders. Guys that every time they come out, they look improved. I kind of wrote Krylov off a long while ago. And over the last year or so, he showed that he has very good ability. He has a great skill set to compete in the light heavyweight division. Moving down on the card, we have Jonathan Martinez versus Said Nurmagomedov. This is a fight where I truly believe that Said Nurmagomedov was robbed. First round was clearly Said. He landed good kicks, good shots on the feet, had the back, 2 close rear naked chokes, control on the ground for a bit. Jonathan Martinez landed some good leg kicks, had some clinch control time, but ultimately I thought he lost that round. Second round was a little bit closer. Martinez landed some good leg kicks. Said Nurmagomedov landed a couple good shots on the feet, more powerful shots in my opinion. I think Said might even have had a takedown in the second round. Second round was very close. Very, very close. I thought Said Nurmagomedov edged out the second round, but I could give it to Jonathan Martinez. Third round, Said Nurmagomedov looks a little bit more tired. Jonathan Martinez looks a little bit more fresh. But Said Nurmagomedov lands a few good shots in the feet in the opening minute or so. Eventually catches a kick while landing a punch. And, whether you want to call it a drop or not, I don't know. I watched it 3 times, but I'm still not 100% sure what I would call it. Because he caught a kick and landed a punch. Got him down. Ended up on top of him. Controlled him for about a minute. Ended up with his back. And then Jonathan Martinez just said, you know what? I'm just going to stand up. Just stands up somehow. Has him on his back. Just stands up. And then Said Nurmagomedov takes the hooks out because I guess he's tired. Then they end up in a clinch with Jonathan Martinez kneeing his thighs for the rest of the third round. I thought bare minimum you have to give Said Nurmagomedov round 3 and round 1. And I don't really think it's up for debate. Round 2 can be up for debate. But I scored at 30-27. I thought Said Nurmagomedov got robbed here. I guess if you want to say the third round was kind of close, I don't want to, when I watched it live, and I have to rewatch this fight, I said I think it was a robbery. I very rarely call fights a robbery. I was talking about this on my live stream. The only fights that I've called a robbery since I started my YouTube channel was Sean O'Malley, Petr Yan, and Paddy Pimblett, Jarrett Gordon. I think this might be up there. I have to rewatch it. I do think you can give Jonathan Martinez the second round. But how are you giving him the third round? All he did was land some knees in the clinch. I don't see how you can give him the third round. But Said has to work on his stamina. His striking ability is very, very good. In the first round, the grappling exchanges where he scrambled to the back, incredible. Jonathan Martinez showed, that he's the real deal as well. A lot of people were doubting him. He finished Cub Swanson. Cub Swanson's even tweeting out saying Jonathan Martinez isn't good. But I think he answered some questions in this fight. I think he looked good. I ultimately don't think he deserved this win. But he gets the win, and now he's going to be ranked in the top 15 because Said Nurmagomedov was ranked in the top 15. But I don't feel he won this fight. I'm going to go back and rewatch it. I feel like he got outstruck. I feel like he got outgrappled. In the third round, he did have an armbar attempt in one of the scrambles. I can't remember exactly when it was. But, how much credit do you really give that over the striking exchanges and being dropped earlier in the third round? So I think he lost. Ultimately, he gets the decision. Moving down the card, Mario Batista versus Guido Canetti. This was a crazy fight while it lasted. You have 75-year-old Guido Canetti coming out guns a-blazing, looking for a KO. Mario Batista takes him down. There's some good scrambles. He's looking for the rear naked choke. Guido Canetti defends. Then there's another scramble trying to get up, and he's kind of takes his eye off the ball for a minute. Starts not really paying attention, prioritizing getting back to the feet, and Mario Batista locks in the rear naked choke and finishes him in the first round. And this is a trend that I've been noticing in MMA that I feel like wasn't as prevalent over the last few years. There's so many guys prioritizing getting back to the feet, and they're leaving themselves very susceptible to finishes via rear naked choke. And I think, it's not the exact same scenario because he didn't get finished. It's the same thing with Petr Yan, Aljamain Sterling, too, where Yan was prioritizing getting back to his feet, giving his back, and then ultimately it cost him 2 rounds because he did that. And in this fight, Guido Canetti, I know he didn't want to end up on bottom, but ending up on bottom and getting controlled a little bit is better than getting rear naked choked and finished. So I think guys have to prioritize being safe while trying to get back to their feet. Guido Canetti made that mistake, and he paid for it. Moving down the card, the first fight on the main card, Vitor Petrino versus Anton Turkalj. This was a crazy fight. This was a wild fight. Both guys landed big shots to this fight. Vitor hurt him multiple times. Anton ended up on his back multiple times. Somehow Vitor was just shifting and turning into him, even with the body triangle on him. This was a super competitive fight. Ultimately, I think it ended up being a 30-27 decision win for Vitor. I thought Anton got at least one of those rounds. And it was a close fight. I thought you could make an argument, but I thought ultimately Vitor should have gotten the decision. But Vitor showed power in this fight. He showed good grappling ability. He showed good defensive grappling ability. And he didn't gas out. Everyone kept focusing on, look at his muscles. Look how strong and explosive and powerful he is. And they were already kind of setting the narrative that he was going to gas. He didn't gas in this fight. Now, he got taken down quite a few times. He ended up in bad positions, but he would always find his way out of them. Now, what does a win over Anton Turkalj really tell us? It doesn't tell us a whole lot, but still, nonetheless, a win in the UFC, a win on a big main card in the UFC, and he looked pretty decent in this fight. Outside of that, the prelims, I don't really, there's nothing I really want to talk about too much on the prelims. Rafael Sunsao ends up getting submitted via inverted triangle in the third round. Competitive fight, and ultimately he gets submitted. He got hurt badly in this fight with I think it was a spinning back fist. Got hurt badly, ended up following him to the ground, and ends up in an inverted triangle and gets finished in that third round. Solid win for Davy Grant. There was a weird scenario where Davy Grant kind of grabbed the cage when Rafael Sunsao was looking for a takedown, and then they took a point from Davy Grant and then ultimately take away the position from Rafael Sunsao. And then that leads to the finish. So a little bit of controversy there, but Davy Grant gets it done. Rafael Sunsao retires. I'm glad that he's retiring before he ending up like Tony Ferguson or someone along those lines where he's getting finished. Also, Keith Peterson should have been on top of this finish. Rafael Sunsao looked like he might have been out for 15 seconds before Keith Peterson finally stopped the fight. That's super dangerous. And if something happens to somebody in the sport, especially in the UFC, where someone were to die or have a very serious injury because of a referee stoppage, it would hurt the sport tremendously. So Keith Peterson's got to get on top of that. Also, one more thing I want to mention, because I'm not going to talk about any more of these prelims. The fence grabbing has to be penalized. There was so many fence grabs tonight, and nobody's doing anything about it. Keith Peterson did it in, the Rafael Sunsao fight, but outside of that, there must have been 100 fence grabs on this card. I'm so sick and tired of people grabbing the fence for advantageous positions and getting away with it. They need to start taking points every time that it is done, regardless of what it does in the fight, because then people will stop. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments about all this. How did you feel about Merab Dvalishvili's performance tonight, getting a win, a 50-45 win over Petr Yan? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, and thank you so much for watching.